everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my channel. Before I begin this video, I just want to preface this by saying my original intention was to create one long video with tips and tricks for beginners with Copic markers. As I've started editing, I'm noticing that the videos are kind of long, or the video is getting long, and so I want to break this up into 5 parts because there's a lot of important information in this video, and I don't want it to be missed. It might be helpful to some people. So I'm going to put this into 5 parts. I'll link everything at the end of the video for the next part, and I'll put all the links in the video description below for all 5 parts as well. I hope you enjoy. Today I have a special video for you, and this is a viewer request, and I'm really excited to share this video with everyone. So it was requested to do a video for Copic markers for people who are new or beginning Copic markers, what colors are my favorite, doing blendings, and what my recommendations are. So I had a lot of fun thinking about what I wanted to talk about because I have been using Copic markers for about a year now, and I feel pretty comfortable with them, and I have a lot of words of advice I want to share. So I've broken it up into 5 categories, and so I'm super excited to share this with you, and thank you so much to the viewer that requested this. Is a great idea. So if you have other ideas or there's other videos you'd like to see, leave them in the comments below. I love the ideas, and I didn't think of doing this, but I'm super excited to share with you what I've written down and what I thought about. So let's get started with the first item. So the first item I want to talk about is paper. Before you can even begin using your Copic markers, you're going to need paper, and there's a lot of choices out there. And so I've made a chart of the top 6 that I have experimented with, and these are 6 that I've used, that I went through in my process, my journey starting with Copic markers, and what I've ended up with, what I've found to be the best. And so I'm going to do some swatches just to show you the difference between these papers, because it can be very confusing. So I'm going to pick a Copic marker that's sort of in between, sort of a darker medium. So I'm using V06, and it's called Lavender. So these are some paper options that you may have seen or you may have. So the first one is plain paper. Everyone has access to plain paper. Just print your paper 8.5 by 11. Now, there are reasons that this isn't good to use. So I'm going to do a quick swatch here of plain paper. And so it lays down okay, but when you lift it up, you can see that there's bleed through. So printer paper has a high absorbency rate. It doesn't have any coating at all, so it really sucks the ink out of your marker. If you want to get longevity with your Copic markers, you don't want to be using a paper just like plain paper, because it's going to really suck your markers dry really quickly. The other thing is it's hard to blend on because it's not very thick. It doesn't have the durability to hold up to consistent blending and laying down of colors, layering of colors. It just doesn't have that weight behind it. So it's not really a great option. If you're starting out, even then, there are inexpensive solutions that you can try and use as a substitute, and I will show you some of those. So the next item I want to share is coated cardstock. So this is something that I got at Staples, and it's got a coating on it. So if you think of when you're developing pictures or processing images, you can get matte or glossy. It's like a glossy. So it has a coating on top, so it won't suck your marker ink out, but it also has its non-good things too. So let's take a look at a quick swatch. And so there is a swatch with the same marker, and you can see the difference. So the problem with the coated cardstock is that because it is coated, it doesn't absorb the ink. So the ink lays on top, and it doesn't dry very quickly. And when it does dry, it's dry now, but when it does dry, it creates ballooning effects. So it almost makes a puddle, and it leaves that puddle on top of the paper. So you can see every brush stroke, every time you reactivate that ink, it makes a mess. So you don't get that smooth gradiated blending that you want, because at the end of the day, the premium reason to use a Copic marker or a Copic marker collection is because they blend seamlessly. You don't get brush strokes, and ink lines, they all go together so you can blend two colors and they look just like as if you printed out a digital gradient. That's the goal that you're trying to achieve. So coated cardstock, although it doesn't suck up the ink because it doesn't have a high absorbency, it dries weird, it dries with the ballooning, and it doesn't give you the smooth gradients. So the next paper I want to show you is the Strathmore watercolor paper. And so this is cold press paper, just a student grade 300 series. When I'm doing watercolor on my cards, or even if I'm using distress inks as watercolors, I do use this paper. So I'm going to show you what this looks like with Copic markers. So I have a swatch here. And so this presents some of the inefficiencies that we saw with the plain paper. Because it's watercolor paper, it's meant to be absorbent. It soaks up your ink, it draws it out of the barrel through the brush tip, and it really takes a lot of ink to lay down to make a saturated color. As it pulls into the paper, the color lightens quite a bit because that is what watercolor paper is designed to do. It's designed to pull the ink or your watercolor paint and suck it in, and then it dries itself after a bit of time. So it wants it to have that time to stay wet so that you can work with the medium. But with markers, we don't exactly want that. We don't want to be using a great deal of ink to get a blend. Now, the positive thing about this is it is thicker, so it doesn't bleed through like we saw with the plain paper, but it sucks up your ink. And so you don't want to be using Copic markers on watercolor paper. This isn't ideal. So now we're getting into a little more of a better option with the bottom row. So I want to talk about a few things here. So the next one I have up is cardstock. This is basic cardstock. And so if you're starting out with Copic drawing, as well as making cards, if that's what you're doing, then you don't want to spend a fortune to get started. You want to build up your collection because it is expensive, and it's just almost impossible to run out and buy all of the professional supplies that you need right from the beginning. So when I started out with basic cardstock from Staples, and so I've marked this as that. And so I went to Staples and I bought a package of cardstock, and it comes like you would buy printer paper. Like if you were to buy a pack of 8.5 by 11 plain printer paper, it's packaged the same way, the same amount. I believe it's 100 sheets, and I paid around $20 for it. So it's more than printer paper, but I've had that paper for over a year now, almost a year and a half, and I have not run out of that very first pack. I've made 100 cards and done many different stamps and die cuttings, and I've never ever used it all. So if you're looking to start, Staples cardstock is great. It's not a premium paper, but it is a really good paper, and it's very inexpensive. So I want to show you a swatch here. This is nice to blend on. It gradiates the strokes so you don't see every brush stroke very obviously. And if you're blending two colors together, you're trying to create a gradient, this cardstock really looks nice. It does help you create those gradients, and it does hide those brush strokes. So it's a great cardstock to start out with. If you're beginning, I would recommend this. It's very inexpensive, and it'll get the job done. If you're doing illustration or card making or stamping or anything like that, it's a nice option. Now, if you want to move up to something premium, the next two options are equally great, but they have different uses. So I use both of these papers, and I use them in different circumstances. So the next two papers I have are Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I use 80 pound. And then I have Strathmore 400 series mixed media paper. So I'll show you what the Strathmore looks like. So the Strathmore mixed media paper comes in a brown cover. It has the picture of the rubber boots and the flowers on it. It is a 400 series, so it's a mid-level grade. I use this, honestly, I don't really pay attention to the grade very much. If it's student grade or whatever, I find it works fine, especially for card making. And I just worry more that it is a mixed media paper, and it is. And it's a nice weight. It's 140 pounds, which is the same as the watercolor. I do like the Strathmore brand. I buy this because it's available at Michael's, and so I primarily shop there, and it's convenient to pick up, and it works really good. So now, the two uses that I use these two papers for is very different. With Nina, I use this with stamps. So if I'm stamping something, I will use typically a Memento ink because this works well with Copic markers, and to do my blending on a Nina Solar White cardstock is amazing. It has a great blending capability. It holds up well to heavy inks, and it looks nice. A final finished product. I've not seen a better paper for card making. I will only use this to cut out shapes or stamps. I won't use it to make my card base. I will use the Staples cardstock for my card base, because even if I need to do a little bit of, or add a little bit of media to that card base, I do know that this cardstock is still going to hold up really well, and it's cheaper than the Nina, so I use that for the bigger pieces. Now, the Strathmore is something that I use when I'm doing illustration. The thing I like about the Strathmore is it's more vibrant, and because it's a mixed media, I can use other mediums with it. I can use colored pencil, or I can paint watercolor on it, and I have done that on other cards, but I do like it for illustration. So I'm going to swatch these two, and then I'm going to show you an example with the Strathmore mixed media, because it is quite different. And so this is the Nina Solar White cardstock, and you can notice right away that the ink color compared to our other swatches is quite vibrant and quite dark and very even. It looks beautiful, and you can see the difference between the Staples brand and the Nina Solar White. It obviously is the premium cardstock, but again, as an alternative, especially if you're starting out, this is still a really great option. Now, if we look at the Strathmore mixed media, because this is a mixed media paper, it's not a marker paper, but it does hold marker. It's meant to hold mixed media, like all different types. So it doesn't lay down exactly as nice as the Nina, but it does work really well, and it holds that vibrancy, and that's what I like about mixed media. Especially if you put watercolor on mixed media, it has so much punch and life to the watercolor compared to a regular watercolor paper, which pulls in the color a little bit and desaturates everything. So I'm going to show you an example of some cards that I've done. So with this one here, this little Kraken is made using the Staples cardstock. I created this before I had the Nina Solar White cardstock to use. And so you can see the blending. You can see the blending behind his tentacles. I've used a darker red. And this was also when I had limited Copic markers too. So I really had to stretch my markers, and we'll talk about that later in the video. So you can see that this blended really nicely. And this is another example of a piece that I did with Staples cardstock, and I did the blending and the Copic coloring on that cardstock there. For comparison, I brought this out, and this card is created with Nina Solar White cardstock, so you do get an even application of ink, and it's easier to layer, but it's a little bit more expensive for that paper, so it's not necessary to achieve a good look, because you're still getting a really good result with the Staples brand. Now, I do use the mixed media for illustration, so I'll show you what that looks like. So with my Copic colorings, I've done this piece, which is from my visit to the cat cafe, our local cat cafe. And then I also did this drawing of my sister's ferret Zeus. And so you can see that the colors are really, really vibrant, and I love that about this. I do like bright colors, and the mixed media paper really holds up. It doesn't bleed or give you bloating of the lines or the ink dispersion. It really holds up to where you put it. It doesn't blot or look muddy. So I really like that. And then another example of my illustration is here, and this really shows off the vibrancy of the inks on that mixed media paper. And on this paper, I've used a blend of micron pens, Copic markers, and jelly roll pens. And so you can see how those applications work really well all together on this cardstock. So I hope that gives you sort of an idea of paper to use, and there's different price ranges, different options. So I wouldn't recommend anything in this top row. No plain paper, no coated cardstock, and definitely no watercolor paper. You don't want to suck your markers dry. They're very expensive. But anything in the bottom row, a Staples or a generic brand cardstock if you're starting out. Nina Solar White cardstock is preferred, but you can also use a mixed media cardstock, which is really nice as well. So this concludes part 1 of my beginner video series. In the next part, I would like to talk about color charts and explain to you why they're useful and ways you can use them to help you grow your collection. So I will put a link at the end of the video and in the description below. I hope to see you in the next video. If you did find this video helpful, let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and you can subscribe to be notified as I post more videos to my channel. Thanks for watching.